In 1700s France, there was a profession that required a great deal of stamina, skill, and discretion. That's because these men were responsible for carrying one of the most valuable commodities of their age, books. It might not sound like a big deal today, but in the 1700s, books were incredibly expensive. And so, the person responsible for transporting them from the printing press to eager readers had to be careful, strong, and above all else, quiet. Before text messages, emails, and even before the telephone, people relied on letters to communicate with one another. Now, long-distance communication was incredibly difficult and time-consuming. In fact, it would take weeks for a letter to arrive at its destination, if it was intercepted by thieves or lost along the way. But all of that changed when the French government hired a man named Henry de Ressier to modernize the postal system. Under de Rossier's direction, the government created a vast network of roads throughout France. They also established a series of post houses along those routes where mail carriers could rest and switch horses. Then came the sorting offices. These were facilities where workers would open, read, and redirect letters to their final destinations. This practice wasn't done out of the goodness of their hearts. However, the government paid the workers a small fee for each letter they opened and redirected. And since mail carriers had no way of knowing how many letters they'd have to deliver on any given day, this was a great way to supplement their income. As you can imagine, reading other people's letters was an incredible breach of privacy, and so the job was given to the lowest-ranking employees who were paid next to nothing. Since they had little experience and even less training, these workers often made mistakes. Sometimes they'd mark a letter as being unimportant when it was actually incredibly urgent, or they might accidentally send a private letter to a government official instead of the person it was intended for. Mistakes like these meant that sometimes the wrong person would get a letter, or even worse, important pieces of mail never reached their destination at all. Not only were the sorting offices extremely inefficient, but they were also incredibly slow. Letters could spend weeks sitting in a post house while a manager deliberated over where to send it. Because of this, many wealthy people began to hire private couriers to deliver their mail. These men would avoid the government-run post houses altogether and instead travel directly to their destination. One such courier was a man named Jean-Nicolas Leroy. Like all couriers, he worked long and irregular hours, often traveling more than 100 kilometers a day. He was also expected to memorize the names and addresses of every important person in France. But by far, the most difficult part of his job was keeping silent. You see, couriers had to travel through some of the most dangerous regions in France. Bandits and rival couriers would do anything to steal their cargo, books. So while it may seem strange to us today, couriers had to learn how to defend themselves. They also had to keep their mouths shut, no matter how much they were being chased or attacked. If a courier was captured, they were forced to recite everything they had heard during their travels. If they refused, their captors would beat them until they either talked or died. Oftentimes, couriers were tortured by people they had delivered letters to. They wanted to know if the person they received a letter from was also planning to rob them. For this reason, couriers had to be extremely careful about what they heard while delivering mail. But it wasn't just bandits and jealous lovers that couriers had to worry about. The French government was always trying to crack down on subversive literature. Books containing anti-government messages were often smuggled into France in secret, and couriers were regularly stopped and searched for contraband. If a courier was found carrying illegal material, they were usually beaten and imprisoned. Despite all these dangers, couriers were vital to the economy of 1700s France. Without a reliable postal system, trade and commerce would grind to a halt. Couriers also played an important role in the French Revolution. Many of the leaders of the revolution were couriers themselves, and they used their knowledge of the road and their ability to move quickly to evade the authorities. Now, you're probably wondering why we went through all that trouble when we could just email our letters instead. Well, believe it or not, the answer is simple. It's cheaper. Sending a letter via the US Postal Service costs around $1, whereas sending an email costs around 60 cents. And that's just for one person. What if you wanted to send a letter to thousands of people? Suddenly, the cost of snail mail doesn't seem so bad. In fact, one company in the United Kingdom has figured out a way to use the Postal Service to get free advertising. They send out thousands of letters every year and ask people to contact them if they find a letter interesting. On average, they receive about 200 responses per month, which equates to around 2,400 leads per year. And since they're only paying $1 per lead, this is a great return on investment. Of course, not everyone is willing to go to these lengths to get free publicity. But the fact remains that traditional mail is still a viable option for businesses today. And that's all thanks to the hard work of those brave men who dared to speak up. But you're not going to believe this next story. From stolen words to stolen pictures, check out this video about the man who stole the Mona Lisa. And I'll see you in the next one. A few years ago, a group of scientists in Germany had an idea. They wanted to find out whether or not emotions are contagious. To do this, they recruited a group of volunteers and showed them a series of pictures while measuring their brain activity. The pictures were designed to elicit specific emotions, such as joy, sadness, and anger. The researchers then analyzed the volunteers' brain activity to see if they could detect patterns that corresponded to these emotions. What they found was that emotions can indeed be contagious. When a person is exposed to a stimulus that causes them to feel a certain way, their brain activity mirrors the emotions of the person they are observing. For example, if a person sees someone laughing, their own brain activity will begin to mimic the brain activity of the person laughing, causing them to smile or even laugh themselves. This phenomenon is known as emotional contagion or empathy. It is a fundamental aspect of human interaction and plays an important role in our ability to connect with others. Emotional contagion allows us to understand and share the feelings of those around us, even if we haven't personally experienced what they are going through. This is why we can cry when we see someone crying or laugh when we hear someone else's laughter. However, emotional contagion is not limited to face-to-face interactions. We can also experience emotions through written language. For example, if we read a story about someone who is sad, we can feel their sadness, even though we are not physically present with them. This is why it is important for writers to be mindful of the emotions they are evoking in their readers. Words have power and can evoke strong emotions, even if the reader is not the intended audience. So the next time you pick up a book or read an article, pay attention to the emotions you are feeling. Are you feeling happy, sad, angry, or something else entirely? Chances are that the author intended to evoke those emotions in you. After all, they wouldn't have included those words if they didn't want you to feel something. Emotional contagion is a powerful force that can bring people together, but it can also be used to manipulate and control others. For example, a skilled manipulator can make someone feel guilty or ashamed without even trying. By understanding how emotional contagion works, we can better protect ourselves from those who would seek to exploit it. We can also use emotional contagion to our advantage by being mindful of the emotions we are emitting ourselves. If we want to create a positive emotional environment, we can do things like smile more, laugh more, and use positive language. Emotional contagion is a natural and inevitable part of the human experience. By understanding how it works, we can better navigate the world around us and better understand the people in it.